Let's talk about it. Hello, and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaming and everything in its orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into this. Today, we're going to be talking about video games, a topic that I'm not like the most prolific gamer, but I have a long history of playing video games since a child, so I feel like I can talk about this.
Well, that's really kind of the first question. Like, do you consider yourself a gamer?
I mean, I do, so when I was a kid, we had a Nintendo, and then right after Nintendo, my parents bought me a Sega, and I went from Sega to PlayStation to PS2, then to PS3, now on a PS4, and then just random computer games throughout the years. So, I have a decent amount of experience playing video games.
I think my journey was PlayStation 1, and I have, it's funny thinking, I don't have a lot of positive memories of my dad, but I do have one. On the original PlayStation, you could play Civilization, which is a game series that I fell in love with because of my dad. And I remember he used to love playing it. And I remember in the original PlayStation, because, they used to be in the CD-ROM cases. That was way back with PlayStation 1. There was this horribly huge and jam-packed, folded so tight that this poor piece of paper was struggling against the plastic of this CD-ROM case. And it was just this map, the tree of knowledge that you could take to get all the different technological advances. And I remember I was fascinated with that map for so long. And then my dad, once upon a time, he would open it up and he would use it to tell me stories about how technology gets discovered. And he was like, let me tell you the story about the discovery of electricity. So, maybe that's a bit of a lame reference, but it's a nice memory at least. But PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and now on the PlayStation 5, which apparently, a year after its launch, Sony people who still want it do not fucking have it because for some reason they are just not producing enough units.
Well, it's also just so freaking expensive. I mean, the PS4 alone was really expensive. Then when you factored in the PS4 Pro, and I will deal with the 4 until they stop making games for it.
Yeah.
Because that's what I had to do with 3. When they stopped making games for 3, I was like, okay, now I have no choice. I have to move on to 4.
To be fair, I think that's a very similar approach I have to iPhones. I remember when I was young and I was desperate to get because I was the second of 5 kids. There was no way in hell my mom was going to get me a car because we were fucking poor. Very lucky and got a flip phone, which was called a Diamantis or something like that. I don't really remember much about it except for the fact that it was a flip phone. I could play Snake, and it was just for me to call my mom if and when I needed her in a moment of desperation. Because it's my mother, I think me being attacked by random men on the street probably wouldn't be classed as a sign of desperation. She'd still be there on the other end of the line hearing me get the absolute shit kicked out of me going, James, this is not important. I am at work. Call me for an emergency. Click. I can imagine it now. She'd have hung up on me. But after that, I got a first generation Nokia touchscreen phone. And I loved that phone. I was upset because touching and actually having a touchscreen where you could do things. And that was fun. But also because it was a Nokia, it was indestructible. And once upon a time, to prove a point to a friend about how indestructible it was, we were driving along a freeway. I threw my phone out the window and they stopped. We drove back. I picked it up and it was fine. And around about the time that I purchased that phone, iPhones first became a thing. And I never grew up on Apple products. So for me, I was always like, oh, it's just another fancy phone with apps. And sure, apps are fine. but I'd never worked with an Apple. I didn't know about apps at that point. Like, I just had my phone for phone reasons. I
Yeah.
had my laptop if I wanted fun things. Um, but I ended up moving from the first generation Nokia Touch to an iPhone because the call feature stopped working on the Nokia. I upgraded to an iPhone when the actual core ability of the phone, which was making and receiving calls, became untenable. The phone was truly useless. But by that point, it was an iPhone 6. And then same thing, I kept with my iPhone until that became so back out of date that I then had to move up to an iPhone 10. So I've
Yeah.
always been very that kind of a vibe where it's like, if it still works, don't need to be replacing it.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Speaking of Apple, God, I remember because I'm old enough to remember when the first CD-ROMs came out. And that was like a revelation in video games because all of a sudden it made this huge leap in graphics and interaction. And my dad had an Apple because he was an artist, and so we would get games on CD-ROM. And I remember it was actually my first introduction to horror games because he bought a game called The Seventh Guest, which is a puzzle-based game, but it's very like it's got a lot of horror elements in it, and I was hooked. Like I just could not stop. I never beat it because I could never solve the fucking puzzles, but but like it was in a creepy mansion with all this, atmosphere. And the that was back when they would like film the actors doing something and then superimpose it on the background, so it was like, oh my God, the graphics, which today is like, holy shit, this is potato as fuck. But back in 1996 or 95, that was the shit.
It's funny when you said you remember when apples first came out. I was thinking, oh yeah, because you were there in the Garden of Eden when apples were like first a thing.
No, but in fact, I was. I mean, how old would I have been when the first Apple computer came out? I probably would. I don't know if I was. I was born in '83, so if it came before that, no. But if it came out in the early '80s, yeah, I was around, and you know,
I remember when we first got a computer at the house. And obviously, for the people who listen, if you are the age where you don't know what get
dial up.
off the phone, I need to use the internet. If you're not old enough to remember that, you're too young, period. Full stop.
Oh God, like AOL and instant. You've got mail. I remember all that.
MSN. MSN Messenger. I was a part of the generation where we said stupid shit like "roar" means "I love you" in Dinosaur because we were emo kids, but we were still totes adorbs with a Z, kawaii with our fucking raccoon tail hairstyle, so much eyeliner that it looked like we got smacked upside the face by our parents. Oh,
So you were an emo kid?
yeah.
Oh, well, I was a goth, which was sort of the prototype to emo. So
You see, there you go. We are the same. Time moves in flat circles. I don't know what that means.
But I'll admit, though, of my video game history, I didn't play a lot of video games that involved fat characters. That really wasn't like, well, one, because there weren't a lot of video games that featured fat characters, and two, like that's just not where my style of gaming went. Like I played Sonic the Hedgehog and I played Super Mario Brothers, and then when I was on PlayStation, I was playing the Final Fantasy series. So
Well, I think it's a bit of a hard one, isn't it? Because the majority of gaming history is made up of characters whose models are predetermined by designers. Most games do not give you the freedom to custom create your characters, which, as I'm
yeah.
sure most gamers will acknowledge, like when I discovered Grand Theft Auto, you better believe I would send CJ to the motherfucking burger shop and make that cunt as fucking fat as possible. He was throwing up every 3 visits. That's what the game coded him to do. But I made that fat shit go until he was literally as fat as the game would allow him, and it gave you a trophy for doing it. So I'm just saying, committed to the gains, digitally and in real life.
I think the only game that I ever played where you could not only customize your character as much as you wanted, but also you could make them fat was The Sims.
Sims, that's another one. And even a game like Spore. to a lesser extent, which
Oh yeah, yeah. You could like manipulate the body of the creature and like you could make the midsection like really huge and round and try to like approximate like a human sort of.
thank God for Praxis Studio. Yeah, I think that might have even been like an instance for like I don't know people with all sorts of like different like body mod interests because truly like the dimensions were cooked. You
Yeah, I
could
mean you could create like damn near anything on that. Like
you
you
could
could
create a creature whose knee bones would walk through the creature's head every time because the game parameters allowed for it. So I mean, sometimes it was fun just to be like, I don't even know what this is. Like, what? Oh, like what's the evil alien race from Star Trek, the Borg? You will be
Mhm.
assimilated, and how the ship is like a giant cube, and it's
Yeah.
like, why would someone make that, girl? Just to prove you can do it.
Yeah.
Like that shit's fun. But back on the history for a brief second about like the history of video games, what I was going to say was I remember when we first got a computer and how it was preloaded with a really shitty JavaScript version of Wheel of Fortune. It had some kind of Tomb Raider Pharaoh style game with
Mhm.
walls that were clearly just 1 pixel thick, and then you had to like walk around corners and avoid zombies. Pinball was a revelation when I first got it. But yeah, I remember. Oh no, and you know what? That was a Macintosh computer. That's
Oh,
how
was
old it was. That it was old enough not to be a Mac. It was
but a
a
Macintosh. Yeah.
That's how fucking old it was. And I remember as well when we moved from Sydney to Queensland because we were going through boxes of things. My dad had a collection of games on floppy disk. Obviously, they weren't like highly developed games because they weren't that big, but still games on floppy disk. Oh. It is wild to like kind of like reflect on the history of like tech and that real exponential curve that we are on. Because like how long of a gap do you feel like there was between like consoles of the same brand?
Mhm.
So like Nintendo, right? And I know
Yeah.
Nintendo wasn't like Sega and it wasn't Dreamcast, but
Yeah.
like how long was there between like the release of different consoles?
I don't remember. Like, I believe the Nintendo came out before I was even born. I think it came out in 1982, or maybe it came out the year that I was born. And I had one by the age of 5.
Yeah.
So, that's 5 to 7 years worth of Nintendo. And then I think Super Nintendo came out when I was in third grade, possibly, which would have been around 1990. So, and then I don't remember the PlayStation properly until I was about 16, which would have been about 1996 or 1997.
Yeah, I feel like that tracks for me. I would have been about 4 or 5 at the time. I have a very vivid memory of it being like games to me were like Mousetrap and like board games and things that parents would buy. And then all of a sudden, there's the Game Boy. All of a sudden, there's the PlayStation. All of a sudden, these things are just there. And I have a very distinct memory of being a child and getting the DualShock controller for the game Ape Escape, which they designed specifically to use the DualShock controller. And that was
Mhm.
a revelation because it was the first time that, as playing a game, if your character got hit, you'd feel the vibration in your hands. And I freaked
Yeah.
out so hard that I ran and told my dad because I was afraid the monkeys were coming out of the TV to get me. But I loved it. And like, oh, that,
I remember playing Tomb Raider with that DualShock controller, the first Tomb Raider entry, and I've tried to replay that game. Unfortunately, like the
it's
only
so
versions
janky.
that I can find are PC or yeah, or they're PC versions, and they're buggy as hell.
I,
And
I
you
remember
can't
the
even use like I have a controller, but it won't even work for it. So like I gave up. But I really miss playing that game.
I have this distinct memory of Lara Croft and her 5 head, not her 4 head, her 5 head, because that fucking mound of space. McDonald's would have paid a premium to advertise on that shit. I remember slow movements. I remember the wolves when you went into the first cave. I remember the
Hmm.
training in the ballroom. I
Hmm.
remember the butler shuffling along behind you and locking him in the freezer. That that was fun.
You're forgetting about her cone boobies. That's back when her boobies were just like two pyramids on her chest.
Well, Madonna thought she was the original. Hell no, Lara Croft. cone titty icon coming through for the girls. Um, but taking a step away from the nostalgia of tech and games and phones and all that, fat characters, right?
Mhm.
So, yes, Grand Theft Auto, yes, Sims, but like Mario, I think for a long time
Yeah,
was one of the few like
chubby characters in video games. And,
I don't think
I'd hesitate to even call him chubby, but he was always drawn as being pot-bellied, whereas Luigi was very lanky and skinny.
very that vibe. And then it was always playing some of the left right two-stage platformer games. We have like Bob,
Mhm.
or you would have oh gosh, I can never remember their names. But these morbidly obese characters who are somehow still incredibly competent fighters,
Mhm.
That always made me happy. There was one character, though, in the video game series Tekken. There is a
Mhm.
fighter called Bob, and he was introduced back in 2007, right? And
Mhm.
I've loaded this up on the Wikipedia page for this character, so get ready for this story, kids, right? So it says here, once a charming and slim fighter, Bob participated in numerous tournaments and was not only beloved by the fans, but also by the spotlight. With immeasurable speed, Bob's only flaw was his lack of power, causing him to suffer greatly when fighting against opponents heavier and larger than himself. Determined to triumph, Bob increased his body mass by fattening himself, all the while making sure that he would not lose his speed in the process. After successfully reforming, Bob made a surprise reappearance in a recent martial arts tournament, dubbing himself as the perfect combination of speed and weight. The crowd, however, did not see eye to eye with Bob and simply thought of his current appearance as someone who was a shadow of his former self. Not to be affected by such rumors, Bob immediately entered the King of the Iron Fist Tournament 6 to return to the spotlight and prove that his combination would be supreme.
Well, there you go.
So, like, gain a character, kids. Like, actual, factual shit. Actual representation. And listen, the artwork for Bob, he's cute. Like, hang on,
I
You'll
don't think I played Tekken.
Have you seen this character before?
Oh, okay, yeah. But I'm pretty sure I never played Tekken because that was on the PS1, right?
If it was Tekken 6, that would have been either 2 or 3.
Okay. See, on PlayStation consoles, I have almost exclusively played either Final Fantasy or Kingdom Hearts. Like
Nerd!
those are like the two, yeah, what can I say? I'm an RPG person for the most part. I mean, but then I also love like I said, horror games, because that all started with the Seventh Guest, and then like I guess culminated in Silent Hill, which became my favorites horror survival series.
Now, speaking of horror, isn't there, like, is it Blade where there's the obese vampire?
Yeah, but
And,
I don't think that is continuity in the comics. Like I don't think that character actually exists. I think that was an invention of the film.
uh, okay.
But yeah, I mean, nevertheless, there was a giant, like, morbidly obese vampire in that movie.
Did he make it into the game, though?
I don't know because I never played any of the games based on the movie.
Hang on, let's have a quick Google. Blade. Blade video game. Characters. Scrolling across. I am not seeing the vampire. So maybe the vampire only made it into the movie.
Yeah, it was probably solely for the film.
Another thing I see a lot of, especially when I see characters these days, um, zombie video games for some reason. Have you noticed? It's always like there's a class of zombie that's like a super morbidly obese, like bellies hanging out of whatever scraps of clothing they've got left. There's like organs hanging out of their jelly. They're usually some kind of like tank character, or they're like a glutton character that like eats your team members, or it has like a projectile vomiting because obviously it's so fucking fat, digesting live humans. It's just vomiting everywhere. And usually when you blow them up, they have like a massive field of like coverage because there's just so much to them that when you blow them up, they just go everywhere.
It's probably like for the purpose of the game, it's probably like you said, to have like a tank character that's a difficult boss or enemy to defeat. And it's probably also like a totally cliche comment on American society and consumerism, like, because that's pretty much what a zombie is. It's in contemporary terms, it's a comment on consumerism.
But then I would almost think, especially with the push for like roiding and like muscle these days, like it would make more sense to have like a muscle zombie where it's like maybe the infection. Oh, well, then, you'd still have deterioration, I suppose.
Yeah. But well, you also have to remember that 90% of America looks like the obese zombie, not the buff zombie. So again, they're just trying to represent the population.
Gosh, like the morbidly obese zombies, the most authentic fat representation we have.
Well, that's like, did you ever have you seen Zombieland?
No.
Oh, it's really funny. Like, I know you're not much for horror, but it's more of a comedy than it is a horror movie. And it's starring Jesse Eisenberg, and he's talking about when the zombie infestation happened. And he said the first people to die were the fat people because they couldn't run fast enough.
I've seen that GIF of like a fat person running and a zombie running after him, and like it just catches up.
Yeah.
But then, okay, sidebar. I hate fast zombies because I feel like that's just like the quintessential horror element gone wrong. Because like, what are zombies? Dead and slow.
They're reanimated corpses, so they should be slow and shambling. But it like many things, it just depends on what type of zombie you're talking about. Because like when I saw 28 Days Later, I was like, these zombies run. They run faster than humans can, and it's because they're not actually dead. They're just infected with a virus called the rage that like causes your body to be constantly like pumping adrenaline, so that like they can just chase right after you, no problem. Like the only way to outrun them is in a car. And I thought that was kind of a revelation in zombie movies, because like I was used to the slow shambling corpse, and now all of a sudden there's a whole like pack of these things like sprinting towards you.
Yeah, but that's like being all like ghosts are still like the spirits of dead people, but they're completely physical and can remember everything about their lives before they were dead. It's like a complete rewrite of the archetype. And I don't vibe with that because I'm like, if you wanted something new, why not just make something new? Why call it something else? Why call it something else,
Well, I mean, I guess in defense of 28 Days Later specifically, they never use the word zombie. They just say infected. I mean, they look like zombies because they're like bleeding from all their orifices and like they're chowing down on humans, but they don't call them zombies in the movie.
I don't know. I mean, people can do what they want. Just, I don't know. That's always something where I'm like what? Vampires are no longer like allergic to the sun. Vampires no longer.
I can't defend Twilight. If anyone's going to defend Twilight, I'm sorry. I'm an Anne Rice fan. I grew up on Anne Rice's vampires, and Twilight is, I don't know where the fuck that came from, but yuck.
Things of that nature that I just, yeah. It's a no from me.
No.
It's a no-go.
I thought one of the funniest before we finally get back to what we were talking about, which is the actual content of the episode. I wanted to, because I think this is really funny. I remember when Twilight came out and everybody was, talking about it, and it was mostly like middle-aged soccer moms that were talking about it. And I was introduced to the Twilight universe. I read all three of the books plus half of Breaking Dawn before I was like, I don't know why I can't get that time for my life back. But then I saw a meme that said, in my day, vampires sucked blood, not dick. I
actually did a quick Google of obese video game characters, and there are a couple of articles on this. So you've got characters like Pig Josh from Red Dead Revolver. You've got Dr. Clash from F-Zero.
Never played it.
You have Barry Wheeler and Zeke Dunbar.
From what game?
It just says the character names.
Oh,
This poster boy for Big Mac attacks. Yokai Electro. Doesn't say what they're from. How is that meant to help anyone? Oh yeah, CJ from San Andreas. Yep. Bob from Tekken. Rufus from Street Fighter 4.
I never played Street Fighter 4.
He's the one in the yellow jumpsuit that opens at the belly, and he's a fat guy with like a long blonde.
Oh, okay. I've seen his picture. Well, what about E Honda? He's a sumo wrestler.
I haven't. I'm only up to number 3. King Hippo from Punch Out. The coach from Left 4 Dead 2.
These are all games I've never played.
Again, zombie character. And then number 1 is Hoagie from Day of the Tentacle, which, again, I've never played.
Me neither.
But, again, like, if this is an article from a gaming website, like, deep diving into, like, the most prominent, like, obese characters, like, what does it say that, you know, for yourself, who considers themselves an avid gamer, and, like, I'm not much of a gamer myself, but, like, I hang out with the gamers, and, like, I'm not familiar with most of these titles, and it's like...
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm an avid gamer, but I'm so picky about what I play. Like like I said, I've played Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, the Silent Hill series, Castlevania. That was another one that I was really into. Like, it had to be specific. Like, it had to be something that I found really interesting, or the story had to be really complex, or it had to be like very thought-provoking. Like, I was not I mean, when I was a kid, it was the simple stuff. It was Sonic the Hedgehog, Spyro the Dragon. Oh God, stuff's gonna escape me. Like, back on the Nintendo, anything that was one of the Disney titles, I played those. But in my adult life, yeah, I always wanted a more complicated story. So there's a lot of these games I didn't play.
So, I mean, we've talked a little bit now about our history with consoles, tech, video games, experiences. We read out a list of titles, and for the listeners, I'm curious to know if anyone is familiar with these titles, because, I don't know, maybe there are hardcore fans out there that are like, justice for Hoagie, but, like, I've never heard of these. So it makes me curious, like, what does fat representation look like in video games now? And I think it's interesting to consider how many more games there are where you can custom design your own character, an avatar.
I was going to mention, though, and I could be wrong about this, because I didn't get to play most of the Zelda titles because they were on Super Nintendo and I didn't have one. But isn't Ganon, the main antagonist of Zelda, a pig or a warthog or something? And isn't he usually drawn to be obese?
I think he's just meant to be a big and powerful character. I believe Ganon takes on different forms in different iterations of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've only played Breath of the Wild, so the only Ganon I've ever had to face are the different Ganon forms in that game. None of whom were pig-shaped, and in fact, the final Ganon was just like a big amorphous fucking cloud. So, you know. But I think he's always drawn to be big and powerful, so even when he probably appears as like a pig or some kind of like big fat animal, he probably has a lot of strength to him and is perceived as very powerful rather than fat and weak. And I do find that as a curiosity because, again, comparing it to the most prominent fat character I've gotten to play, CJ in San Andreas, like, it's not just that CJ got fat and that was an aesthetic that I enjoyed. Like, again, in order to make him fat, he has to throw up like several times after force feeding him junk food. But also, he's slower. He's not able to run as fast, and he gets out of breath frequently. The character has to stop, wheeze in the street, and then keep on jogging. So, like, the representation of like fat characters, I don't know. It's like the fat characters I've gotten to see are put in positions of weakness.
Yeah.
The most active, and again, positive example of a fat video game character I've gotten to play as is Mario. And he's not really that fat.
No. I have noticed on The Sims 4, right? There is, but I will say that you have to download custom content in order to create the kind of person you want to create. Fortunately, there is a plethora of custom content out there. It's very easy to find where you can create a more realistic looking fat person because The Sims thinks that all fat people look alike. And it's not even a flattering view, you know. But if you download custom skin tones, custom body sliders, custom body hair overlays, you can make a really sexy chubby guy. And then if you download the naughty stuff, you can make your chubby guy have sex with anyone you want, and it's graphic. And actually, I should have looked this up before we did this, but there is a person who does custom content for The Sims 4 where he actually made where he made Gainer as a career.
Really?
Yeah, it's actually a career field, you know, and you have to eat so many times within an hour, eat so many different servings of whatever. And then they also, in tandem with that, created something called the weight power, which is you can just add fat, right? And you watch your sim get fatter. Like it takes like a couple of minutes, but you steadily watch your sim get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Dang. That sounds kind of hot, not gonna lie.
Yeah. That's why, because let me tell you, I love The Sims, but it is damn near unplayable without custom content because it is so boring. Once you have, like, if you play only the base game, start downloading custom content because you will, like, it opens up whole new worlds for you with The Sims.
I mean, it's funny, you mentioned, like, you made Gainer as a career, and you were mentioning, like, you have to eat so many times in an hour, and I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a job. That sounds like a lot of effort.
Yeah.
Here's a question to you, though, and a hypothetical. Let's say you have the chance to create a video game today. And let's say it centers on fat characters, but you get to choose the narrative, the genre, you get to choose the platform, everything, right? It's just the only obligation you've been given is the characters have got to be fat. Tell me about this game.
Well, I suppose I would want like maybe two different styles of game. Like one would be probably along the lines of Dream Daddy, where you get to date a bunch of guys who start off looking like, you know, kind of regular, and then you fatten them up as the game goes on. Or possibly an adventure style game. Like it would be nice to see obese characters who are actually really capable and, you know, can go on adventures and have different, you know, kind of like again an RPG where you have different classes. Like you could have the mage, the warrior, the the thief, you know, whatever. Although a fat thief might be a little bit difficult to like be incognito, but you know what I'm saying.
I do, but I'm not going to lie to you. I'm very distracted now because the only word in my head is Brian.
Brian from Dream Daddy, yeah.
Who is obviously a goal for me. Like beautiful, fat, ginger, big bellied, big beard, just that's just chef's kiss. And it's funny, you mentioned adventurer, and it made me think immediately of the hiker class trainers in Pokemon. They are always depicted as being big and burly and buff and fat and round in the middle. So, you know, I do think there's certainly depictions of characters, but I like what you were saying about the potential for games. An RPG style thing would be really fun, getting to explore the capabilities of those characters. Or, like, for me,
you know, like the biggest, fattest guy could be like the sort of tank character. You know, he's the one that could take all the damage, or she, or they. However, in fact, that's another thing that really video games should step up on is like if you can customize your character, you should also be able to like either have no gender or however you want to define it. Like,
you know, people fully be like, why do boys play as girls in online games? You want to know why? They got way cuter costume choices. You want me to play the boy where his choice of shirt is red, blue, green, or yellow T-tank with a pair of shorts or jeans, probably sneakers, whereas Miss Thing has 78 different hairstyles. She has dresses, coats, gowns, skirts, a two-piece or one-piece bikini set. She's got a pantsuit, a power suit. She has everything with shoes and handbags and glasses and a fucking little dog to go with her too. Like, the design matrix for characters, excuse me, the design for characters is very heavily skewed towards perceptions of gender, where women are given options and men are not.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I want more. I want more. And I do think that creating a scale of gender would almost be the easiest way to do it. I can't remember what game it was that I played. No, do you know what? It wasn't even a game. There's a short series on Netflix called 100 Humans. And during one of the episodes, they explored gender and sexuality. And there was a really cool artistic display that they used of a man who transforms into a woman and then transforms into the middle, and how the head shape was more or less the same, but obviously it was like the hairstyle like changed for each one. And I was just like, this is a very easy way to program games. Like, if you want your character to be more feminine, do that. If you want them to be more masculine, do that. And if you want them to either present as in between, third, or no, you can have them just in the middle, because just a heads up to people who are like, oh, the woke brigade, they want all their options. Yet they do want options, but also, like, for a gaming matrix, if you make it so that like the non-male or female gender option is like presented in the middle of male and female, people probably aren't going to be fucking pissed at that, because they're smart enough to be like, well, gender is difficult to program into a game, so let's leave it alone.
Yeah.
So, you know, but like, could have it in the middle, and that could come with every option. And to be honest, I would fucking pick that. In fact, don't even do that. Scrap the male and female. Have the gender blob option. Person Potato Head, have them in the middle, and then just stick shit on.
Yeah.
Just do that.
Just make it completely customizable. I mean, just give the player as many options as possible in terms of facial structure, body structure, features, hair, clothes, class. You know, if it's an RPG, give them every option of class.
Everything.
And I never played the Elder Scrolls, but I feel like like they have like 1,000 different classes and whatnot. I just don't think that they had the, you know, the very multitude of genders option.
Well, they don't necessarily have a multitude of genders, but there are different like species that you can go with as well, which is fun. But even within that, you know, there's some modeling issues with people who are scaling larger. Obviously, I would always make my characters fucking huge. If I had to create a game today that centered on fat characters, I would honestly love like a town builder game. I think that would be really fucking cute, and I can already picture it in like a chibi style, which lends itself to fatter characters anyways, because they all have those adorable little plump round edges. I love the thought of like a little bubble-shaped town with cute, fat-looking, chubby, chibi buildings, you know, and you have to custom build things. And, you know, you could have your fat characters doing all sorts of tasks, which it doesn't have to be taking a shorter or a longer period of time for anything, because everyone's fat, and that's just how long it'll take. And I think that'd be really fucking cute. And you could call it something as simple as like Fat Town. Boom.
Chubby Town, USA.
Fat City, USA. Do not whip me, Mr. Simpson. I'm full of chocolate. Uda. But listen, if there's any video game designers out there that want to make Fat Town happen, send us a message, please.
There was one guy, and again, I need to do more research, but I think that they are on DeviantArt, or maybe they have their own Patreon. They did create a video game involving a chubby character. It was like you eat and it gets bigger, and that's his power-ups. Like the more you eat, the bigger you get, and the stronger and more powerful your character becomes. And like the bosses and enemies are all like, you know, like a kaiju style, you know, morbidly obese bosses. And I just, for the life of me, cannot remember the artist's name or the name of the video game. But if someone out there knows who it is, or what I'm talking about, you know, you might be playing it already.
Do you know what I just remembered as well? So there are those like iOS games, right, where you play them and you have to watch an advert, and for a long time you would see adverts for these random poorly built games about characters who would do random things, like they would run through a wall of shoes and all the shoes would make them stack up, and you have to like balance it out before you get to the end to make sure that you could reach the final platform or something. And they would use this metric with all sorts of different concepts. So it was like a character with like different levels of platform shoes, or you would run through different types of multiplications and you had like a crowd of humans. If you
Mhm.
ran through a +5 or a -50 or a this or a that, and that would add and subtract the number of humans in your giant running party. One of such games involved characters who were fat. So they would start off skinny, and if you ran them through a burger, they would get very fat very quickly. And
Mhm.
depending on whether they were fat or thin, depended on whether or not they can get through different obstacles in the course. Because there would be glass floors. If they were too fat, they would fall through the glass floor. If they were too fat, they couldn't like climb over the obstacle in front of them. Or it could be a glass obstacle. You want them fat and strong enough to push through and break the glass. Because if they were too skinny, yes, they could climb over, but they would hit the wall and fall down.
Parts of that game sound a little fat phobic to me. Like, uh-oh, chubby wubby can't the glass can't support their weight.
You know
Whoopsie,
what?
you die,
I downloaded it once and I played it just to be like, I want to see what the fuck this is about. And they just did different types of skins for different fat characters. There was a fat black man, a fat white woman in fucking athleisure wear. There was a pizza delivery guy. There was someone in like a cat suit. There was all sorts of campery, fuckery, stupidity. I'm gonna see if I can find the name name of this game. But while I Google that, I'm curious to know from your perspective. We're talking about games. Let's talk about gamers. Do you feel like the link between the expectation of gamers being obese is fair? Do you think that's reasonable?
I mean, it's a stereotype, but I mean, I have met quite a few overweight, very hardcore gamers, and I'm talking about like the kind of people that when World of Warcraft came out, they didn't leave their house for a year. And that again, that's a very it's stereotype, but yeah, I suppose like the correlation exists because the idea is like if you're very devoted to video games and you play them for many hours a day, you're sitting down and you're probably snacking, you're probably drinking soda or something else that's sugary, because you're trying to like stay awake and stay alert. Um, so yeah, I mean, probably not, it's probably not like that
Oh my
weird of
god.
a correlation to make.
So I just did some Googling. So the game was called Fat to Fit. And I'm just going to share my screen for Tim right now so that Tim can see this is.
Okay, I think I've seen adverts for this before.
So I just searched it on my Apple store. The history shows that I never downloaded Fat to Fit. I downloaded a game called Bag to Fit, which is the exact same thing, except it's a backpack on the back of the character that seems to be inflating.
Oh,
So there is a knockoff game called Good Shape and another one called Twerk Race 3D Fun Run, which is where it's just the ass that gets
I
fat.
swear to God, people have too much time on their hands.
This is just, oh my gosh. Ugh. But I think like all people, there's what is it, like Fatify, those like fucking face photo like amending apps where like you can
Oh yeah.
do that and you do it, and the models that they use always look fucking huge. But when you do it, you just look stupid and weird. It's devastating. I'm sat there like I want to see what I look like fat. Why won't you let me, girl? Um, but gamers and obesity. Yeah, I think you're right. Like when you're sat down snacking, that happens. There's definitely that expectation, especially with like the whole like war on obesity with kids. There's definitely that expectation that like don't buy video games for your kids because they're gonna get fat. You should encourage them to play football and get outside with their friends. Like,
I mean, to an extent, I understand because, like, when I was a kid, yes, I had video game consoles, but I was also chased out of the house, like, on nice days. It was always go outside, play, and don't come back until the sun sets. Like, I guess parents just aren't doing that anymore. And then again, the society has changed to the point where, like, when I was young, we knew all of our neighbors. Like, we knew pretty much everybody in the neighborhood. I am almost 40 years old. I've been living in this house that I'm in for it's been almost 15 years. I only know one of my neighbors.
yeah.
You know, it's the world's just changed.
I found another list of fat characters. So, and I cannot believe I've forgotten this person, but the Duke from Resident Evil: The Village.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing images of that.
Like, ah. But also Zangi. Well, I don't know if you would count. Zangief.
Zangief doesn't have like washboard abs. He's got more of that like roid belly, which is an aesthetic, and many gainers do find that hot. I think Zangief is hot just because I've got a thing for wrestlers. Like I watched WWE when I was about 10 or 11, and it started switching some things on in my head.
Yeah, if there is any man out there that wants to do cosplay as Zangief, I will just give you money because you could just like Zangief at me and I would just like give you my wallet, honestly. He's so hot. So fucking hot. Jesus Christ. Eren from the Horizon series. Again, not like a typically fat character, more burly, more bearish, but still, that's a size representation. You've got Ellie from Borderlands, Wedge from Final Fantasy VII.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Um, Gloria from As We Know It, May from Overwatch. So, you know, again, there are characters out there, and again, in some not so unrecognizable series, you know, they are there. It's just a question of like, what can we see moving forward? And I guess I'll be interested to see what people do narrative wise with fatter people as time goes on. Um, do you find that as a gamer,
Mhm.
that you end up talking about fat characters with gamers who are
Oh,
not necessarily gainers?
not usually, because again, with the titles that I tend to play, there's not usually fat characters.
Hmm. I wonder to myself to an extent, like, how those types of people would perceive a gainer archetype as a gamer, because they are stereotyped themselves to be obese, lazy, and gluttonous, and it's what we are.
Mm.
I don't know. It's one of those like nuances that I'm like, I would be interested to probe. You know what I mean?
I'll say that for a lot of the games that I've played, I have seen on DeviantArt them turned into chubby characters. You know, like Squall from Final Fantasy VII, or Sora from Kingdom Hearts. You know, plenty of fan art has turned these video game characters into chubby characters. They're just unfortunately not that when you're playing them.
So here's a question for you, maybe just to round things out. Is there a character that you'd like to fantasize about? Or like a fat.
Well, you know, I will say, and I have to put this in context of I was a teenager when I played this game, so I don't want anyone coming for me that the character's age in the game it was 17, but I was also 17 at the time. Okay, so don't nobody come for me on that one. I had a thing for Squall from Final Fantasy VIII because I was a moody, depressive teenager. He was also a moody, depressive teenager, and I kind of not only like sort of saw a little bit of myself in him, but I also thought that he was animated very like to be very good looking. So
Hmm.
that was the only one. Now, as far as like, I've never really thought about a video game character getting fatter, honestly. I've only ever seen artwork of that done. And so no, I've never really fantasized about a character and seeing him getting fatter. It's just when I was an over emotional teen, I was interested in another overly emotional teen.
That's fair. I suppose like I don't necessarily see video game characters that way, and I think because for me, video games take me out of this world and into the world of the video game. So therefore, there's no need for me to think of the character in that way. Because if I thought of the character, I would really just be thinking of myself. And if I was thinking of
Mm.
myself, I would just make myself get fat, which I'm doing. So yeah. But I think that's just about everything on the topic, really. So, to listeners out there, if you feel that we've missed anything with regards to this episode, if you feel like there are characters that have been unrepresented or aspects of the fat gamer experience that we have not explored, feel free to reach out to us. And who knows, maybe we'll have you on the podcast for a little follow up episode. But that's a wrap for now here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave a good review. If you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at ThiccMouse. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by Stan and stannnum.bsky.social.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify.